This is part 24 of Angular CLI tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss some of the common differences between a development build and a production build in Angular. In our previous videos in this series, we discussed that to generate a development build, we use this ng-build command. We can also explicitly specify that we want a development build by using --dev option. If we want a production build, we use --prod option. So let's discuss some of the common differences between a development build and a production build. Now, by default, a development build produces source maps, whereas a production build does not. So the obvious question that comes to our mind is, what are source maps and why do we use them? To improve the performance, the application's JavaScript and CSS files are combined and compressed. It is extremely difficult to debug those compressed files. A source map holds information about the original files and can be used to map the code within a compressed file back to its original position in a source file. So with the help of these source maps, we can easily debug our application even after the files are compressed and combined. So by default, a dev build produces source maps, whereas a production build does not. But we can change this default behavior using the -sm option. So with the dev build, if you don't want source maps to be generated, simply set this -sm option to false. Along the same lines, if you want source maps with a production build, you simply set that option to true. Let's try one of these commands. So by default, with a prod build, we don't get source maps. But let's say we want to generate source maps with a prod build. All we have to do is set this sm option to true. Let's quickly look at this in action. So ng-build --prod is going to generate a production build, and by default it doesn't generate source maps, but we do want to generate source maps, so I'm going to use -sm option. It's an alias and it stands for source maps, so I'm going to set this to true. So this command is going to generate a production build, but it is also going to generate source maps. There we go. Our production build is completed. And if we look at the dist folder within our routing demo project folder, notice along with the compressed and minified bundles, we also have their respective source map files generated as expected. With the development build, by default, global styles are extracted to a .js file, whereas with the prod build, they're extracted to a .css file. We have just done a production build. So if we look at that dist folder once again, notice the global styles are present in a file that has got .css extension. So that's the default behavior. With the prod build, the global styles are extracted to a .css file, whereas with the development build, they're extracted to a .js file. We can change this default behavior if we want to by using this -ec alias. EC stands for extract CSS. Now with the prod build, we know by default they are extracted to a .css file, but if you don't want that default behavior, use this option. So let's say we want the global styles to be present in a .js file with a prod build. To achieve that, all we have to do is set this option to false. So let's quickly look at that in action. Let's execute this build command once again, but this time let's use this extract CSS option and set this to false. So this is going to generate a prod build, but this time the global styles are going to be in a file with .js extension. Build completed. Now if we take another look with the dist folder, notice the styles are present in a file with .js extension. Next we have minification and uglification. A prod build is both minified and uglified, whereas a dev build is not. First, let's understand what both these terms mean. So what is minification? It's a process of removing excessive white spaces, comments, and any optional tokens like curly brackets and semicolons. Uglification is the process of transforming code to use short variable and function names. We use both these techniques to reduce the bundle sizes. Now to understand minification and uglification, let's flip over to Visual Studio Code. We have our routing demo project here. Let's open the home component, and within our home component class, I'm going to introduce a function. And this is a pretty straightforward function. We named it add numbers. As the name implies, this is going to add two numbers. The first parameter is called first number, second parameter is called second number, and this function returns a number, that is the sum of those two numbers. Within the body, we have created a constant which holds the sum of first and second number, and finally we are returning that result. And then I'm also going to introduce a comment here. Let's call this my constructor. So let's save these changes and then let's do a build. Let's do a dev build first. Build completed. Now let's go take another look at that dist folder. This main bundle contains the code that we have written, so let's open that with Notepad and then search for our comment my constructor. Notice we still have our comment there, and also notice the code is very much readable. I didn't remove any of the white spaces. And if you look at our add numbers function, look at these parameters, first number and second number. They are not renamed, and same is the case with this variable result. It's not renamed as well. So with a dev build, we don't get minification and uglification, but with a prod build we do. Now let's do a prod build and see how things are going to change. But before that, let's close this Notepad and then let's go back to our console and execute this ngbuild command with -- prod option. There we go. Our production build is complete. Now let's take another look at that dist folder. Let's open our main bundle file with Notepad. First of all, notice the code here is not very much readable because it has removed all the excessive white spaces. Let's see if we still have our comment my constructor. Notice we are not able to find our comment. That means it has been removed. And let's look at our add numbers function. So here is our add numbers function. Look at the function parameters. First number and second number are renamed to L and N respectively, and within the function body, notice we don't have our result variable at all. It has rewritten that to return the sum of L and N, that is our first number and second number. So this proves that with a production build we get both minification and uglification. Next we have tree shaking. A prod build is tree shaked, whereas a dev build is not. So what do we mean by tree shaking? It's the process of removing any code that we are not actually using within our application from the final bundle. It's one of the most effective techniques to reduce our application size. To understand tree shaking, I'm going to create a new component. So I'm going to flip to our command prompt window and then generate a new component. So let's use this command ng-gc. Let's name our component xxx. Our component is generated successfully. Now let's flip to Visual Studio Code. We have our component right here. Let's look at the view template of this component, which is right here, and this is the message that the view component displays. XXX works. At the moment we are not referencing this new component anywhere within our application. First, let's do a dev build. Build complete. Now let's take another look at that dist folder. We have our main bundle here, so let's open this with Notepad one more time and let's search for this message XXX works. Now we know this is a new component, but we are not referencing it anywhere within our application. But notice within the final bundle we still have that new component code right here. We know a dev build is not tree shaked, so the code that we are not actually using within our application is still there in the final bundle. Now let's see how things are going to change with prod build. Let's do a production build now. Let's close this Notepad first and let's go back to the console and then do a prod build. Build complete. Now let's take another quick look at that main bundle. Here it is. Let's open it with Notepad and let's search for that message once again. XXX works. Notice we don't have that component at all. So we know a prod build is tree-shaked, meaning any code that we are not actually using within our application is removed from the final bundle. This is one of the most effective techniques to reduce our application size. Next, we have AOT, ahead of time compilation. With a production build, we get AOT compilation, that is, the Angular component templates are pre-compiled, whereas with a development build, they are not. In our next video, we'll discuss AOT compilation in detail. Finally, let's quickly summarize the differences between a dev build and a prod build. With a dev build, we get source maps, whereas with a prod build, we don't. With a dev build, we don't have minification and uglification, tree shaking, and ahead of time compilation. With a prod build, we get all of those. In our next video, we'll discuss AOT in detail. Thank you for listening and have a great day.